On my 68th birthday, my son-in-law snatched my business class boarding pass and handed it to his own mother. "You're too old for Hawaii," he laughed. "Stay home and watch the dogs. My mom deserves this trip more." Then he tossed $50 onto the marble floor. "Take a cab home." My daughter stood silently beside him. I calmly picked up the money, smiled, and walked away. What they didn't know was that I had spent 6 weeks preparing for this exact moment, and before their plane reached cruising altitude, everything they relied on would begin to vanish. I appreciate you joining me for this one. Before we begin, leave me a quick comment. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Just yes or no. Your perspective matters more than you know. A quick note, some details in this story are fictionalized to emphasize the lesson. What truly matters is the message behind it all. I folded Constance's note back into my vest pocket for the last time, unaware that in 3 hours I would be holding it again, not in Hawaii, but in an airport parking lot, calculating revenge. The cottage sat quiet at 5:30 a.m., salt air drifting through the screen door I'd left open to catch the sound of waves. At 68, I had spent 35 years measuring men for suits in Charleston, before retiring to this small Outer Banks place where the morning light reminded me of Constance. Black coffee steamed in my hand. On the kitchen table, a brown leather folder held 5 passports and an 8-day Wailea resort itinerary. My birthday gift to myself, though truly it was a promise I should have kept 6 years ago. Constance's handwriting hadn't faded. The paper had worn soft from folding and unfolding, but the ink stayed sharp. "Eugene someday, Hawaii. Promise me. Promise." She'd written it in 2019, 3 months before the diagnosis. 6 months after that, she was gone, and I'd never taken her farther west than Asheville. I looked at her photograph on the mantel, silver hair, that smile she saved for moments when I'd finally stopped working long enough to notice her. "I'm bringing you today," I said to the photo. Should have done it 6 years ago. I had stitched wedding dresses, burial suits, christening gowns, fabric for every season of life. But I never learned how to tailor a promise to fit around death. Every measurement I'd taken in 35 years had been precise inseam shoulder-width break of the trouser at the shoe. I measured this trip 3 times the same way. Every detail had to be straight. Constance deserved straight seams. The folder sat exactly where I'd placed it, the night before, corners aligned with the table edge. Inside my passport, Adrian's garrets and 2 small blue booklets for the twins. 5 people. 8 days. Wailea Grand Resort Ocean View Suites, the kind of trip Constance used to clip pictures of from travel magazines she'd never throw away. I pressed my palm against the vest pocket, feeling the note's outline against my chest. The fabric was wool charcoal gray, the last suit I'd made for myself before closing the shop. Every stitch by hand. If you've ever driven 4 hours to an airport knowing something is wrong, but not yet knowing what you understand the mathematics of dread. It starts as addition, small things that don't sum correctly. Then it becomes subtraction. By 7:45 a.m. I stood at the Charlotte Douglas business class check-in area, folder in hand, watching my daughter arrive with her family through the automatic doors. Adrienne saw me first. At 39, she'd inherited Constance's silver blonde hair, but not her ability to hold eye contact when uncomfortable. She'd married Garrett Townsend 7 years ago, and slowly stopped looking me in the eye whenever money was discussed. "Happy birthday, Dad," she said, voice quiet, gaze drifting past my shoulder toward the departure board. Garrett Townsend followed 3 steps behind, rolling 2 suitcases, with the practiced ease of a man who traveled often on other people's expense. At 42, he wore confidence like an expensive suit he'd never actually paid, for the kind of fit that looked right from a distance but showed poor construction up close. He nodded at me without slowing. "Morning," he said. "Traffic wasn't bad. Dakota appeared first, 15, Adrian's oldest, already filming everything on her phone. Then the twins appeared, hands linked. The younger ones, 7 years old Ren, who had her mother's cautious eyes, and her brother Silas, who stayed silent, watching the adults the way children do when they sense tension, but can't name it. "Grandpa, are we really going to see whales?" she whispered. "That's the plan, sweetheart." Then Bernadette arrived. She came through the terminal doors in leopard print, wheeling a 32-kilogram Rimowa suitcase with a priority baggage tag looped around the handle. Bernadette Townsend, 65, Garrett's mother, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, and a silk scarf that probably cost more than my first month's rent in Charleston had cost 40 years ago. I froze. That suitcase was too large for someone just saying goodbye. I knew luggage the way I knew fabric. You don't bring 32 kilograms to an airport unless you're going somewhere. The priority tag confirmed it. She wasn't dropping off. She was checking in. I looked down at the folder in my hand. 5 passports. I counted heads. Adrian Garrett. Dakota Wren. Silas Bernadette. 6 people standing in the terminal. Bernadette adjusted her scarf and smiled at me, the smile of someone who already knows the punchline. Garrett whispered something to Adrian, near the Starbucks kiosk, their backs turned, shoulders close in the posture of conspiracy. She nodded without speaking. Wren tugged my hand. "Grandpa, why is Grandma Bernadette here?" "I don't know yet, sweetheart, but I was beginning to. A person only brings a 32-kilogram suitcase when they intend to stay. The question was, stay in whose place?" I opened the folder, looking at the 5 boarding passes I'd printed the week before. 5 names, 5 seats, 5 reservations at the Wailea Grand Resort. The trip I'd planned for 3 months, the promise I'd carried in my vest pocket for 6 years, the last thing I could do for Constance, all of it measured to the millimeter. Bernadette set her suitcase down beside Garrett's, the priority tag swinging. I looked at the tag, then at my daughter's face, then at the folder. In 8 minutes at the business class counter, I would learn exactly whose name was about to be called. But standing there at 7:47 a.m., coffee still warm in my chest, and Constance's note against my heart, I already knew the mathematics. 5 boarding passes, 6 people. Someone was being subtracted. And the person holding the 32-kilogram suitcase wasn't the one being left behind. The answer came at the business class counter, when Garrett stepped forward before I could. The $50 bill hit the marble floor between us with a sound like a slap, crisp, public meant to be heard. I had moved toward the counter with the folder, 5 passports arranged in order. Sarah Brennan, the young airline employee behind the desk, reached for my documents with a practiced smile. Garrett's hand landed on my wrist. "Dad," he said, voice pitched loud enough to carry across the terminal, loud enough for the 8 business class passengers in line to hear clearly. "Your old flying business class is just a waste. Let my mother go instead. You stay home, clean the house, take care of the dogs. That's enough for someone your age." Sarah Brennan's smile faltered. Her hand froze halfway to my passport. I looked at my daughter. Adrienne stood 3 feet away, her gaze fixed on the departure board. Her jaw was tight. She said nothing. "Garrett," I said quietly, "I planned this trip for yourself, I know." He pulled the folder from my hands, extracted my passport and boarding pass, and handed them to Bernadette. "Mom deserves this more. She raised me alone. You just measured fabric." Bernadette took my boarding pass between 2 manicured fingers, examining the seat number with theatrical interest. Then she turned to me, phone already raised for a selfie ticket displayed prominently in frame. "Step back," she said, waving me away. "Don't get in my frame. I'm wearing Chanel and you're wearing discount rack clothes. Truly a mere laborer." The business class line had gone quiet. I could feel their stares. Sarah Brennan stood frozen, passport still in hand, her face flushing red with second-hand embarrassment. She looked at Garrett, then at me, mouth opening and closing. In 35 years of tailoring, I learned this: when fabric tears, you can mend it with careful stitching. But when a seam is deliberately cut with scissors in front of witnesses, no amount of thread can make it whole again. Garrett wasn't taking my ticket because he needed it. He was cutting the seam in public because he wanted everyone to see. Here! Garrett reached into his wallet and pulled out 2 20s and a 10. He held them up high enough for the line to see, then let them fall. The bills separated in the air before hitting the polished marble between my feet. Return taxi fare. Don't say we treated you badly. Adrienne's small voice cut through. Grandpa, I looked down. She was still holding Silas's hand, eyes wide and confused. 7 years old, watching her grandfather dismissed like a servant who'd forgotten his place. I bent, slowly picked up the $50 and folded it once. Then I smiled the smile I'd practiced for 35 years of difficult customers. The smile that said everything was acceptable, everything was fine. Have a safe flight, I said. I turned and walked away. Behind me, Garrett's laugh carried across the terminal, performative, meant to reassure the watching crowd that what they'd witnessed was family business, nothing serious. I heard Sarah Brennan's quiet voice asking about luggage. I heard Bernadette already planning her Instagram caption. I didn't look back. The walk to Lot E took 11 minutes. My Ford F-150 sat exactly where I'd left it, navy blue and unremarkable. I climbed into the driver's seat, set the $50 on the dashboard, and stared at it. The engine stayed off. The parking lot hummed with distant jet engines, the beep of garage gates, families loading luggage. I opened the glove compartment. Inside was a pre-labeled envelope I'd prepared 6 weeks ago. The label read Homeless Fund in my own handwriting. I'd written it on a Tuesday evening after Conrad and I had finished our 3rd planning session. The $50 went into the envelope. I sealed it and put it back. My phone vibrated. A notification Adrienne had posted to TikTok. The video showed her face bright with excitement. "We're going to Hawaii," she announced, turning the camera to show Silas waving. The gate area appeared behind them, Adrienne checking her phone, Bernadette posing with her boarding pass. Then Garrett's voice clear in the background. "Forget that old tailor. People like him spend their whole lives bowing down to serve others. He won't dare utter a word." I stopped the video and replayed the audio. Twice. 3 times. The $50 sat on my dashboard like a receipt for everything I had failed to see coming. 7 years of funding Garrett's illusions. 7 years of watching my daughter choose silence over her father. 7 years of measuring every gesture, every loan, every investment, with the precision I'd used on inseams and shoulder widths, believing that if I got the measurements right, the suit would fit. I had never tailored a suit in anger. And I had never taken revenge in anger. I wasn't angry now. I started the engine, picked up my phone, and dialed the number I'd saved 6 weeks ago under a single name, Conrad. He answered on the first ring. "Conrad," I said. "I'm on my way. I'll have the file ready," he replied and hung up. Conrad Whitfield had been my attorney for 18 years. He already knew what I needed. I knew exactly where every single bolt supporting Garrett's empire was located, because I had paid for every one of them. The business class ticket he'd taken, I'd funded the credit card that bought it. The Chanel Bernadette wore, I'd co-signed the loan that financed Garrett's boutique consulting office. The twins' private school, Adrienne's leased Mercedes, the Wailea resort reservation, all of it ran through accounts. I'd guaranteed loans, I'd backed credit lines, I'd secured. I backed the truck out of Lot E and turned toward uptown Charlotte. Conrad's office was 43 minutes away. Garrett's plane would be airborne in 90. I had exactly enough time to dismantle everything before they reached cruising altitude. Conrad's office was on the 12th floor of a glass tower in uptown Charlotte. The kind of building where lawyers charged by the quarter hour and kept their doors locked until you proved you could pay. The file folder on his desk was 3 inches thick. 6 weeks of my life, reduced to exhibits, affidavits, and the kind of documentation that ends careers. Conrad Whitfield stood when I entered. At 52, he'd kept the lean build of a college runner, but gained the silver temples that made juries trust him. He'd been my attorney for 18 years, handling everything from the sale of my tailoring shop to Constance's estate. 2 cups of black coffee sat on the dark oak desk between us, still steaming. He'd timed my arrival to the minute. "Eugene," he said, gesturing to the chair. "Sit." I sat. The file lay open, pages marked with yellow tabs, sections highlighted in neat columns. I recognized my own handwriting on some of the documents. Loan guarantees I'd signed 5 years ago, business formation paperwork, title transfers I'd approved when I still believed Garrett would use the money to build something real. The office, LLC, the Escalade, the $380,000 co-signed loan, all of it can be revoked, Conrad said, turning the folder so I could see the first page clearly. "You own the leverage, Eugene. You always did." I picked up the coffee. It was bitter the way Conrad always made it, the way I preferred it. "Walk me through it." He pulled out a flow chart he'd drawn by hand, the kind of diagram tailors use to map complex alterations. "The Uptown office, Garrett leases it through an LLC you formed in 2018. Your name, your tax ID, your liability. He pays rent to himself using money from the business line of credit you co-signed. The Escalade is titled in your name as collateral for that same credit line. Everything flows through you." "I didn't want to do this, Conrad," I said quietly. "I wanted to believe he would stop. I know." Conrad's voice carried no judgment, only the practiced calm of someone who'd seen families destroy themselves over less. "But you've waited long enough. The question is, are you ready to pull every thread? Planning revenge is like drafting a suit pattern. You measure twice, cut once, and leave no room for the seams to unravel under pressure." Conrad and I had been measuring for 6 weeks. It started on August 14th. I'd received a certified letter from Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds requesting signature verification on an office title transfer. I hadn't filed any transfer. When I called Conrad, he pulled the record within an hour. Someone had submitted paperwork to move the LLC ownership entirely into Garrett's name, removing me from the registration as if I'd never existed. The signature on that document looked like mine. Almost. 6 weeks, I said, setting down the coffee. "We've been planning this for 6 weeks because I wanted to be sure. I wanted to give him time to come to me, to explain, to fix it himself." "He didn't come," Conrad said. "No, he went to Hawaii instead." Conrad nodded slowly, then reached for a second folder thinner than the first. "Then we moved to phase 2. He opened the folder and placed 2 documents side by side on the desk. On the left, the office title transfer application, bearing a signature that read, Eugene Mercer. On the right, the original LLC formation contract from 2018, with my authentic signature at the bottom. I leaned forward. The forged signature was close. Same initials, same general shape, same loop on the capital M. But it was wrong in the ways only someone who'd signed 10,000 documents would notice. The pressure was uneven. The E trembled at the start, hesitant like someone tracing over a photocopy. The final R trailed off instead of ending with the deliberate serif I'd learned in 1988. My real signature, the one on the 2018 contract, was perfectly straight, each letter carrying the same weight, the same controlled pressure I'd used measuring wool for 35 years. "Look at the pressure points," Conrad said, sliding a magnifying glass across the desk. "Your signature has consistent weight across every letter. This one," he tapped the forged document, "trembles." I stared at the forgery. I have signed 10,000 documents in my life. Contracts, checks, deeds, birth certificates, Constance's death certificate. And every signature carried the same straight-line integrity I learned measuring wool in 1988. A signature is a promise. It says, "This is me. This is my word. This is what I will stand behind." Garrett had taken my word and tried to replace it with a lie. "He didn't just want to take my property," I said, voice steady, hands steady. "He wanted to erase me from the record entirely, as if I had never existed." Conrad set the magnifying glass down and picked up a legal pad covered in his own notes. North Carolina General Statute 14-122, forgery of deeds and instruments filed with public record. He submitted this to Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds 2 months ago. It's not just fraud, Eugene. It's a Class H felony one step above Class Y, more serious than a bad check. This is deed forgery. The air in the room changed. A family dispute about money was one thing. Adult children borrowing too much, parents enabling too long. Eventually someone cuts someone off, and Thanksgiving gets awkward for a few years. That's civil court. That's settlements and lawyers shaking hands in hallways. A Class H felony was different. Criminal, I said. Criminal, Conrad confirmed. This crosses from civil into criminal. Are you prepared for that? I looked at the two signatures again. Mine straight and true. His forgery shaking and desperate. I'm prepared, I said. Conrad made a note on his legal pad, then reached for a third folder I hadn't noticed before. It was unmarked, thinner than the others, placed at the edge of the desk, like something he'd been waiting to reveal. He slid it across to me. There's one more thing you don't know yet, he said quietly. Your accountant called me 4 months ago. He's been on our side the entire time. I opened the folder. Inside, 4 months of financial records, spreadsheets, emails, wire transfer receipts, all organized with the precision of someone who knew exactly what prosecutors would need to see. The inside informant was about to reveal exactly how deep Garrett's fraud had gone. The name at the top of the first spreadsheet was Graham Ashford. Conrad pressed the speakerphone button, and Graham's voice filled the oak-paneled room like a deposition being read into evidence. Mr. Mercer, Graham said, his voice steady, but carrying the slight tremor of someone confessing to something they'd carried alone for months. I just forwarded the final email thread to Conrad. Garrett's entire discussion archive from the past 3 months, including the airport scheme and his plan to abandon Adrian once he secures the assets. I'm sorry for knowing this and not telling you sooner. I looked at Conrad. He nodded once, confirming he'd received the files. Graham, I said, keeping my voice level. You did the right thing. How long have you been reporting to me? 4 months, sir. You recommended me for this position. I've been documenting everything since June. Graham Ashford was 44, a certified public accountant I'd known professionally for 8 years. When Garrett mentioned needing someone to organize his books in May, I'd suggested Graham immediately. Garrett never asked why a tailor would know a CPA. He just took the recommendation, grateful that someone else was solving his problem. Graham had been my inside informant for 4 of the 6 months he'd worked for Garrett. The email to RT, I said. The real estate broker. You sent that one last night. Last night, yes, sir, Graham confirmed. Garrett sent it at 11:43 p.m. on September 27th. Subject line, timeline confirmation. He told the broker that once the old man's assets transferred his wife, he called her V. In the email would get 60 days, then he'd move forward with dissolution. He wrote that she won't fight it because she never does. Adrienne's middle name was Victoria. V. Conrad made a note on his legal pad. I kept my hands flat on the desk, steady. The $23,000 to Bernadette, I asked. Company account, Graham said. Categorized as consulting fees. I have the wire transfer records and the corresponding invoices she submitted. Their fabricated dates don't match service descriptions or copy-pasted from templates. It's textbook embezzlement. An inside informant is like a loose thread in a cheap suit, invisible to the man wearing it. But once you know where to pull, the entire garment unravels in your hands. Thank you, Graham, I said. Conrad will be in touch about the forgery case. Keep your records organized. Yes, sir, Mr. Mercer, I really am sorry. You did the right thing, I repeated, and Conrad ended the call. Silence settled over the office. Through the 12th floor window, I could see uptown Charlotte stretching south toward the airport. Somewhere down there, Hawaiian Airlines flight HA-30 was boarding. Conrad pulled out a handwritten list. We have 90 minutes before takeoff. 4 calls. Let's start, I said. The first call went to Carolina Trust Bank. I spoke to a compliance officer named Jennifer Sterling, a woman I'd worked with during Constance's estate settlement. She remembered me. Mrs. Sterling, I said, I need to execute an authorized user removal under CFPB compliance protocol. Account holder Eugene Mercer. Remove Garrett Townsend and Adrian Townsend from all authorized user status effective immediately. I'll need written confirmation, Mr. Mercer. Conrad Whitfield will have it to you within the hour. Understood. The removal will process at 2 p.m. today. 73 seconds. Conrad noted the timestamp, 11:47 a.m. The second call was to the same bank, different department. Business lending. I filed a formal fraud notification under the cosigner disclosure provision, the clause buried in paragraph 14, that required me to notify the bank immediately if I had reason to believe the primary borrower was engaged in fraudulent activity. The decision to accelerate the loan would be the bank's, but the documentation Conrad was sending them would make that decision straightforward. I'm filing formal notification, I told the loan officer. Conrad Whitfield will submit supporting documentation by close of business. I'm requesting immediate review and potential call due of the outstanding balance. Mr. Mercer, that's $380,000. Calling it due would require— I understand what it requires, I said. The documentation is coming. 91 seconds. Timestamp 12:03 p.m. The third call went to Hawaii. David Kahananui managed the Wailea Beach Resort with the kind of professional courtesy that made enforcing cancellation clauses feel almost apologetic. Eugene, David said, his voice warm despite the early hour in Maui. I have your reservation right here. 8 days, 2 ocean view suites. We're looking forward to— David, I won't be checking in, I said. And I need you to execute clause 7.3 of the membership contract. Full cancellation, immediate access revocation for all listed guests. You'll have written authorization from Conrad Whitfield by end of day. A pause. David had worked at Wailea for 20 years. He knew what clause 7.3 meant. The resort could deny service to any guest upon member request, no explanation required. Eugene, I'm sorry to hear that. I'll process this immediately. Is there anything— No, thank you, David. 82 seconds. Timestamp 12:19 p.m. If you've ever made 4 phone calls that ended a man's career, you know the calls themselves are brief. It's the silence after you hang up that stretches into years. The fourth call was the only one that gave me pause. Gerald Whitmore answered on the second ring with the clipped efficiency of a man whose time costs 6 figures per hour. The billionaire Garrett had been courting for 8 months. The investor Garrett believed would fund his expansion into commercial real estate consulting. The deal he'd mentioned to me exactly twice, both times, asking if I'd be willing to provide a character reference. Gerald, I said, it's Eugene Mercer. I apologize for the short notice, but I think you should know exactly who is going to approach you at the Wailea Resort this week. I'm listening. His name is Garrett Townsend. He's my son-in-law, and he's currently under investigation for felony forgery involving fraudulent transfer of property I own. I wanted you to hear it from me before he attempts to pitch you any investment opportunities. Silence on the other end. Then I appreciate the call, Eugene. Consider the matter handled. 64 seconds. Timestamp 12:31 p.m. I hung up the phone and looked at Conrad. He was writing the timestamps in the margin of the file 11:47, 12:03, 12, 19, 12:31. Hawaiian Airlines Flight HA-30 was scheduled to take off at 12:40 p.m. They had 9 minutes left in the world where Garrett Townsend still had a credit limit. Conrad closed the file folder and set his pen down. It's done, he said. It started, I corrected. Somewhere over the Pacific, a flight attendant would ask if he'd like champagne, and Garrett would hand her a card that no longer worked. At 12:40 p.m. Hawaiian Airlines Flight HA-30 lifted off from Charlotte Douglas. 4 hours later, somewhere over the Pacific at 35,000 feet, the first mechanism engaged. The beep was short, crisp, digital, and exactly the sound I had engineered from 4,000 miles away in Conrad's office while they were still climbing to cruising altitude. I wasn't on that plane. I was sitting in my cottage on the Outer Banks watching the sun track west toward the ocean Constance never got to see. But I knew what was happening in business class row 2 as precisely as if I'd been sitting in seat 2D myself. Graham called at 2:47 p.m. Eastern to confirm the timeline. The bank's system had processed the authorized user removal at exactly 2 p.m., which was 8 a.m. Hawaii time, 4 hours into the flight. The timing was deliberate. I wanted Garrett comfortable first. I wanted him settled into the leather seat he'd stolen from me, confident, ordering drinks he couldn't afford, with money that was already gone. Michelle Harper had worked the Hawaiian Airlines business class route for 8 years. She'd learned to recognize the specific silence that follows a declined card in row 2, the premium seats, the passengers who weren't supposed to have payment problems, the ones who'd built their entire identities on the assumption that their cards would always work. Garrett waved her over mid-flight, that casual gesture men use when they're accustomed to service. "Veuve Clicquot, please," he said, extending his platinum card with practiced confidence. "And keep the bottle chilled." Michelle took the card, slid it through the portable reader. The beep came back red, declined. She tried again the way flight attendants do when they want to give passengers the benefit of the doubt, the chance for it to be a machine error rather than a money problem. Same red beep. "I'm sorry, sir," Michelle said, her voice carrying the professional neutrality that comes from delivering bad news at altitude. "The card is declined. The bank is blocking the transaction." Garrett's smile held, but I knew even from 4,000 miles away that behind it his mind was already calculating. He turned slightly toward seat 2D, where Preston Vale sat reading the Wall Street Journal in a charcoal suit I had tailored in 2019 with hand-stitched lining. Preston Vale was a Charlotte commercial real estate developer who'd been wearing my suits for 15 years. He knew quality construction when he saw it. He also knew Garrett Townsend by reputation, the consultant who promised access to investors he didn't actually know, the son-in-law of the retired tailor everyone in Charlotte's business community respected. Preston looked up at the sound of the declined card. He recognized the man beside him falling apart. "Chip error," Garrett said, forcing a laugh. "These readers are notoriously unreliable at altitude, aren't they?" Preston smiled politely and returned to his newspaper. But he was listening. Charlotte's business elite always listened. I wasn't on that plane, but I knew exactly what was happening. When you engineer a man's collapse, you don't need to watch it unfold to feel the architecture give way beneath him. You built the structure. You know which beams you removed. You know the exact moment the weight becomes unsupportable. Garrett motioned to Adrienne. "Use your card," he said quietly. Adrienne reached into her purse and pulled out her personal card, the one she thought was untouched, her safety account from years of careful saving. The account she'd opened before marrying Garrett, the one she believed he didn't have access to, the small financial independence she'd protected. Michelle took the card with the sympathetic efficiency of someone who'd seen this scene before. She swiped it through the reader. Same red beep. "Insufficient funds, ma'am," Michelle said, quieter now. "Do you have another form of payment?" Adrienne froze. I knew that freeze. I'd seen it once before the morning Constance opened the hospice bill and realized our insurance had lapsed because I'd been too focused on keeping the tailoring shop open to notice the premium deadline. That freeze is the moment between believing the world works one way and learning it works another. Adrienne pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She opened her banking app, the one she checked every Sunday morning, the account that should have had $23,400 in it. Her savings from 12 years of teaching before the twins were born, the money she'd never touched. Balance $0. Last transaction, March 15th, 2023. Account conversion to joint, full withdrawal authorized by co-holder. 6 months ago. Garrett had secretly converted her personal account to joint, drained every penny to cover his debts before this trip, and never told her. She stared at the screen. There are two kinds of theft, the kind a father sees coming from a son-in-law, and the kind a wife never sees coming from the man sleeping beside her. I had engineered Garrett's financial collapse deliberately, systematically, with 6 weeks of planning and 18 years of legal preparation. But this Adrian's empty account, this wasn't my revenge. This was Garrett's betrayal executed months before I'd even known about the forged signature, before the airport humiliation, before any of it. He'd stolen from her first. He'd funded their champagne lifestyle and this Hawaii trip with money he'd taken from his own wife's savings while she slept. Garrett? Adrian said, her voice barely audible over the cabin white noise. My account. Where is my money? Garrett didn't look at her. He stared out the window at the Pacific stretching endlessly below 35,000 feet of nothing. Later, he said, voice flat. We'll talk about it later. Bernadette stopped taking selfies with her complimentary champagne. Even she understood that something had shifted, that the performance was over. Preston Vale, in seat 2D, carefully folded his Wall Street Journal and looked away, giving them the privacy people offer strangers whose marriages are dying in public. Adrienne sat in seat 2C, staring at the phone screen that read $0, while Garrett stared out the window at nothing below. Michelle Harper retreated to the galley with 2 declined cards, and the kind of story flight attendants share in crew lounges about passengers who fly business class on money that doesn't exist. They had 6 more hours in the air before landing, and 3 cards that would never work again. The 3rd card had also declined. By the time they landed in Hawaii, Garrett had run out of plastic and explanations. The tropical air hit them like opening an oven door at midnight, humid, heavy, and offering none of the paradise the brochure had promised. Graham called me at 5:47 p.m. Eastern, 11:47 a.m. Hawaii time, to confirm the shuttle cancellation had processed. I was sitting on my porch watching the late September light turn the Atlantic copper. By the time Garrett's family walked off that plane into Kahului Airport's arrival area 12 hours later, I'd already watched the sun set over the ocean and felt for the first time in 5 years like I could breathe all the way to the bottom of my lungs. But let me tell you what happened to them first. 11:30 at night, Hawaii time. The designated pickup zone outside Kahului Airport was lit with harsh fluorescent white, the kind of institutional lighting that makes exhaustion visible on every face. Garrett stood at the curb scanning for the Wailea Resort shuttle van that should have been waiting with his name on a placard. No van. Luxury resort cars glided past Lincoln Navigators with Grand Hyatt logos, Mercedes Sprinters from the Four Seasons collecting other business-class passengers who'd flown the same route. Drivers in crisp white shirts held tablets displaying guest names. Couples climbed into leather seats, while attendants loaded their luggage with practiced efficiency. Garrett's family stood beside a pile of designer suitcases, watching the parade of working credit cards drive away. Adrienne pulled on Silas's hand, her small voice cutting through the humid night. Daddy, when are we going to the hotel? You said there would be a pool. Soon, sweetheart, Garrett said, phone pressed to his ear, scrolling frantically through the Uber app. Soon. 30-minute wait. Surge pricing. The estimated fare to Wailea was $127. Garrett stared at the screen, probably calculating which card might still have enough available credit to cover a ride, or whether any of them would work at all. Adrienne sat on her suitcase, staring at nothing, still processing the $0 balance on the account she thought was safe. Someone needs to call the manager, she announced, gold bangles jangling as she gestured at the empty pickup zone. This is completely unacceptable. We are VIP guests. While they stood under fluorescent airport lights with nowhere to go, I sat watching the sun set over water I had earned the right to enjoy. That had happened 6 hours earlier Eastern Time, 4,000 miles from their midnight chaos. Floyd Saxon walked his dog past my porch every morning at 7 and never asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. At 71, he'd retired from teaching high school chemistry and developed the comfortable silence that comes from spending 40 years listening to teenagers. He understood that some days you talk, and some days you just sit. That afternoon, he'd appeared on my porch around 4 o'clock with 2 mason jars of sweet tea and the patient presence of someone who knew something had happened. We sat in the wooden rocking chairs Constance had picked out in 2006, watching the September light soften over the Atlantic. The air smelled like salt and the beach grass that grew wild along the dunes. Waves crashed in their eternal rhythm, the same rhythm they'd follow tomorrow. The same rhythm they'd followed yesterday, indifferent to human drama playing out in cottage porches and airport terminals. "Are you all right, Eugene?" Floyd asked after we'd been sitting maybe 20 minutes. I took Constance's note from my vest pocket and unfolded it. The paper was soft from handling the ink, still clear someday Hawaii. Promise me. I read it, folded it precisely along the creases, and tucked it back. "I just did something I never wanted to do," I said, "but also something I should have done 5 years ago." Floyd nodded slowly, rocking, not pushing. The sun touched the horizon. A fishing boat tracked north along the coast, its white hull catching the amber light. Somewhere in Charlotte, Conrad was filing the forgery report with the police. Somewhere over the Pacific, 5 people I used to call family were trapped at 35,000 feet with declined cards and no way forward except to land in a paradise they could no longer afford. And here on this porch, I felt the weight I'd been carrying finally lift. Revenge is not about making someone suffer. It's about finally setting down a burden you've been carrying so long, you forgot it wasn't part of your skeleton. For 5 years, I'd funded Garrett's illusions, co-signed his lies, backed his empty promises. I'd measured every loan with the same precision I'd measured inseams, believing that if I got the support structure right, he'd eventually stand up straight on his own. But some men aren't built to stand straight. Some men are built to lean. Sometimes the hardest cuts are the cleanest ones, Floyd said quietly, not looking at me, just watching the ocean. I didn't respond. Didn't need to. We sat until the last copper light faded from the Atlantic horizon, and the sky turned deep purple. The first stars appeared. A neighbor's porch light came on 3 houses down. The evening settled into that particular quiet that only comes to the Outer Banks in late September after the summer crowds leave and before the winter storms arrive. I thought about Garrett standing in that airport pickup zone, about Adrian discovering her empty account, about Bernadette complaining to the indifferent Hawaiian night. I thought about the twins, exhausted and confused, sitting on luggage they couldn't carry, and I felt not joy exactly, but something close to peace. Floyd finished his tea and set the mason jar down on the porch rail. "I should get back. Linda's making pot roast." "Thanks for the tea," I said. "Anytime, Eugene." He walked down the porch steps with his dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit, and disappeared into the dusk. I stayed in the rocking chair, watching the stars multiply across the darkening sky. The ocean in front of me looked exactly like the ocean 4,000 miles west, where Garrett's family was finally 12 hours later, climbing into an overpriced Uber with a driver who wouldn't care that their credit cards had stopped working. But only one of us was standing on solid ground. By midnight, their time, they would discover paradise has a price, and every card in Garrett's wallet had already been declined. The Uber dropped them at Wailea Beach Resort at 12:43 a.m. David called me the next morning to tell me what happened. But I'd already known the broad strokes from the cancellation timestamp Conrad had sent at 12:19 p.m. the previous day. The marble lobby gleamed under soft amber lighting, and Bernadette walked in like she owned it. Leopard print scarf, gold bangles, jangling voice already raised about unacceptable service levels. David Kahananui stood behind the front desk with a folder in his hands. He'd worked at Wailea for 20 years and handled difficult guests with the kind of professional courtesy that made bad news feel almost apologetic. But he'd also worked with me long enough to know exactly what Clause 7.3 meant when I invoked it. The lobby wasn't empty. Late-night guests lingered at the bar overlooking the pool, backlit by blue underwater lights. Couples in resort casual sipped Mai Tais and laughed at private jokes. The kind of people who belonged in places like this, whose cards worked, whose names appeared on reservation lists exactly as expected. And then Gerald Whitmore walked through the lobby. He was there for a private equity conference, the same one Garrett had been planning to intercept him at for 8 months. Gerald moved with 3 business partners in expensive suits, the kind of entourage that signaled serious money and limited patience. They were heading toward the elevators, probably coming from a late dinner, discussing whatever billionaires discuss when they're deciding who gets funded and who gets forgotten. Garrett's face transformed. 8 months of careful cultivation, dozens of emails, the investment pitch he'd been rehearsing since February, all of it suddenly within reach at 12:45 in the morning in a Hawaiian resort lobby. He rushed forward, desperation disguised as casual confidence. "Gerald," Garrett called out, voice too loud for the marble acoustics. "What perfect timing! I was hoping to catch you this week." David stepped between them. "Mr. Townsend," David said, voice calm but carrying clearly across the lobby, "your card has been declined, and we have received instructions from the primary holder of the reservation. Your stay is canceled due to suspected financial fraud." The words echoed in that marble space the way truth does when it's spoken in front of witnesses who matter. Gerald stopped walking. He didn't turn fully toward Garrett, just paused mid-step, head tilted slightly, as if considering whether this scene warranted his attention. 3 seconds. That's how long Gerald spent weighing whether Garrett Townsend, the consultant who'd promised access to networks he apparently didn't have, standing in a luxury lobby, being informed of financial fraud, was worth acknowledging. He turned away and walked through the glass doors without a word. 8 months of relationship building vanished in the time it takes to decide someone isn't worth your business card. The investment deal died on the marble floor between the front desk and the elevator bank, witnessed by bar patrons who would remember the story precisely because they'd pretended not to notice. The sharp beep of that declined card reader echoed through the marble lobby like 3 slaps to the face, public, irrevocable, witnessed by the one man whose opinion Garrett needed most. "This is insane," Garrett said, voice shaking, now all pretense of confidence gone. "There's been a mistake. I'm the authorized—" "You were removed from the account at 2 p.m. today," David said. "The reservation was canceled at 12:19 p.m. I'm sorry, but we cannot accommodate your party." That's when Bernadette started screaming. She'd been standing near the luggage, filming herself in the lobby mirrors, probably planning an Instagram post about arriving at a 5-star resort. But David's words penetrated whatever fantasy she'd been constructing. "I am a VIP guest," she shrieked, bangles jangling as she gestured wildly. "Get the manager up here right now. I will let the whole world know how terrible this resort's service is." Christine Reeves, working the overnight front desk shift, had seen entitled guests melt down before, but rarely with this much designer luggage and this little self-awareness. She pulled up the reservation screen with practiced calm. "Ma'am," Christine said, voice steady and clear, "your name is not on any reservation. You were not supposed to be on this trip at all." The statement hung in the air. Bernadette froze mid-gesture, mouth open, bangles suddenly silent. If you've ever watched someone realize mid-scream that they are the villain in their own story, you know the exact silence that followed Christine's words. It's the silence of mathematics finally adding up, of consequences, becoming visible, of understanding, arriving 6 hours too late to matter. Bernadette wasn't a V. Wronged by bad service. She was standing in a Hawaiian resort lobby at 1 in the morning on a ticket stolen from the man who'd paid for everything, the business class seat, the champagne she'd sipped while I drove away from the airport, the right to be angry when things went wrong. She was complicit, and now she knew it. "Your belongings are already outside," David said quietly, gesturing toward the glass entrance doors. Security had moved efficiently while Bernadette screamed. The designer luggage sat in a neat pile on the resort sidewalk under harsh security lighting. Through the glass, Garrett could see other guests, real guests, being handed room keys, laughing, disappearing into elevators toward Ocean View Suites and complimentary champagne. Adrienne and Silas sat on the largest suitcase, both crying now exhausted, past the point of understanding what was happening, but old enough to know it was bad. Adrienne stood apart from everyone staring at her phone. The banking app was still open. Balance $0. She hadn't spoken since the airport. Garrett tried one more time. David, listen. I can get this sorted out in the morning. Just let us check in tonight. The kids are exhausted. We can... I'm sorry, David said, and he meant it. I have clear instructions. I cannot help you. Bernadette walked out through the glass doors without another word. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. Their luggage sat in a neat pile on the sidewalk at 1:30 a.m. Through the doors, other guests laughed at the lobby bar. A couple checked in at the front desk, received their room keys, thanked Christine with the easy gratitude of people whose credit works. Adrienne looked up at Garrett's small hand still holding Silas's. Daddy? She said, voice breaking. Where are we going to sleep? Paradise had a price, and every card in Garrett's wallet had already been declined at 12:19 p.m. Eastern Time while they were still over the Pacific. Garrett answered Adrienne's question by finding a payphone in the Wailea parking lot and placing one last call to the man he'd thrown $50 at 19 hours earlier. The phone rang at 7:30 a.m. Eastern, which meant it was 1:30 a.m. in Hawaii, which meant Garrett Townsend had finally run out of cards to play and resorted to the only thing left, begging the man he had humiliated in front of 8 business-class passengers at Charlotte Douglas. I'd been awake for an hour. The sun was just clearing the Atlantic horizon, painting my porch in that particular gold light that only comes in late September, when the air is cool enough to require coffee and warm enough to sit outside without a jacket. I had my mug in hand, still steaming, watching the waves roll in, with the mechanical patience of something that's been doing the same thing for a million years. The phone screen showed an unknown number with a 808 area code. Hawaii. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Not because I didn't know who it was, but because I wanted him to count those rings standing on a luxury resort sidewalk at 1:30 in the morning, with his family watching from the luggage pile. Hello? I said. Listen to me. Garrett's voice came through tight and aggressive, the tone men use when they're cornered and trying to convince themselves they still have leverage. Unblock everything. Right now. The cards, the hotel, all of it. You have no idea what you're doing. I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter the way I liked it, the way Conrad always made it, the way Constance used to complain about, before she gave up trying to add sugar to my cup. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said. You're destroying my business over some airport misunderstanding. You're being petty. You're... Garrett, I said, voice level measured devastatingly calm. I found your forged signature on the office title transfer application. Conrad Whitfield is contacting the Charlotte Police Department at this exact moment. Silence. Not dead air, I could hear. Tropical night sounds through his end of the line. The distant crash of Hawaiian surf. The hum of resort air conditioning units. The electronic buzz of security lighting. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the moment the aggression drained out of his voice and something else took its place. 5 seconds. 35 years of tailoring taught me this. When you pull the wrong thread, the entire seam unravels, and the harder you pull, the faster it goes. Garrett had pulled every wrong thread. The business class ticket, the $50 on marble floor, the forged signature, thinking I'd never check the assumption that I was too old and too broken to fight back. Now the seam was coming apart in his hands, and he finally understood that the man on the other end of this phone call wasn't a hurt father looking for an apology. I was a witness to a Class 1 felony who'd already notified the authorities. Those 5 seconds of silence were the longest 5 seconds of his life, and I let every one of them stretch like wool under tension before it snaps. Garrett's voice cracked. The aggression was gone completely, now replaced by the tremor of someone realizing that threats have no power against evidence. Eugene, that was a misunderstanding. I can explain. Good night, Garrett, I said. I hung up. The phone went silent in my hand. I set it down on the porch railing and returned to my coffee. The sun had fully cleared the horizon, now turning the Atlantic from gray to gold, to that deep morning blue that makes you understand why sailors spent their whole lives chasing it. Pelicans flew in formation along the surf line. A neighbor 2 houses down walked his dog on the beach, throwing a tennis ball into the shallow waves. I had engineered this moment with the same precision I'd used to cut 1,000 suits. 6 weeks of planning with Conrad. Graham planted as informant in June. The forgery discovered in August. Every phone call timed, every mechanism triggered in sequence, every thread pulled in exactly the right order so that when the garment finally came apart, it would be complete, irreversible, surgical. 4,000 miles west, Garrett Townsend sat on a luxury resort sidewalk at 1:30 in the morning, holding a dead phone. Bernadette stood near the luggage pile, her leopard print scarf and gold bangles, looking cheaper under harsh security lighting than they had under airport fluorescence. Adrienne sat apart from everyone, still staring at her phone, still seeing $0 where her 12 years of savings used to be. Adrienne and Silas had stopped crying and moved into that hollow-eyed exhaustion that children get when they've been awake too long in situations they don't understand. Garrett had 3 choices: find money for a cheap motel near the airport, sleep on the beach with his children, or call the one person who might still answer, the wife he'd just betrayed by stealing every dollar she'd saved before he took her to paradise on someone else's dime. I didn't know which one he'd choose. It didn't matter. What mattered was that when he'd thrown that $50 bill at my feet 19 hours ago, he'd believed he was dismissing a weak old man who'd spent his whole life bowing down to people like him. He'd believed I wouldn't dare utter a word, but I had spoken. To Conrad, to the bank, to David Kahananui, to Gerald Whitmore, to the Charlotte Police Department, and every word I'd spoken had been chosen with the precision of a tailor marking a hem exactly where the cut needed to be made, exactly how deep it needed to go. I finished my coffee as the sun climbed higher over the Atlantic. The morning was warming up. It would be a beautiful day. The kind of day Constance used to love, when the beach was empty enough to walk for miles without seeing anyone, when the light was clean, and the air smelled like salt and possibility. I pressed my palm against my vest pocket, feeling the note's outline against my chest. I didn't need to unfold it. I knew every word by heart. I'd kept the promise in my way. I'd made the reservation. I'd planned the trip. I'd measured every detail down to the resort shuttle timing, but some promises get kept differently than you plan. I folded the note precisely along its creases and tucked it back into my pocket, right over my heart where it had lived for 6 years, 4,000 miles west. Garrett Townsend sat on a sidewalk in paradise, finally understanding what it meant to measure a man before cutting him loose. Garrett chose the cheapest motel he could find within walking distance of the airport. He paid cash, the last $127 in his wallet, the same amount the Uber had cost. The ceiling fan rattled like loose change in a dryer, and the smell of industrial disinfectant couldn't quite cover the decades of cigarette smoke baked into the walls of the $89 per night motel near Kahului Airport. 3 o'clock in the morning, Hawaii time. 2 narrow beds meant for 2 people, now holding 5. The ceiling fan cycled hot air instead of cooling it. Outside, highway traffic roared past with the mechanical rhythm of something that never stops, never cares, never notices, the small human dramas playing out in rooms that rent by the night. Adrienne and Silas lay on one bed crying, asking questions no one could answer. "Mommy, when can we go home? You said there would be a pool and the ocean. You promised." Bernadette occupied the second bed, still wearing her leopard print scarf, despite the heat complaining to the walls. This is unacceptable. Unacceptable. Bugs. Highway noise. This never happens in Jamaica. Never. She'd been repeating variations of the same sentence for 40 minutes. Garrett sat by the window, scrolling through his phone, trying to find someone, anyone who might loan him enough money to salvage the next 6 days. His thumb moved mechanically through contacts, business associates, who'd stopped returning calls in July, college friends he hadn't spoken to in years, distant cousins who'd unfriended him on Facebook after the third multi-level marketing pitch. Adrienne sat on the floor against the wall, as far from Garrett as the small room allowed. She'd opened her banking app with shaking hands an hour ago and stared at the screen until the numbers stopped making sense and started making perfect sense. Balance $0. Last transaction, March 15th, 2023. Account conversion to joint. Full withdrawal authorized by co-holder. March 2023. She whispered, not to Garrett, not to anyone, just to the stale air and cigarette-stained walls. 6 months ago. You took everything 6 months ago and never told me. Garrett didn't look up from his phone. If you've ever watched someone realize they've been sleeping next to a thief for 7 years, you know the exact expression Adrienne wore, staring at that $0 balance. Not surprise, but the horrible recognition of truth you'd been refusing to see. The unexplained credit card statements. The vague answers about business expenses. The way he'd insisted on managing their finances because she was too busy with the kids to worry about money stuff. She'd saved that money before marriage. 12 years of teaching elementary school, putting aside $200 every month, building something that was hers. The account she thought was safe. The account she thought he didn't know about. He'd known. He'd converted it to joint ownership without telling her. He'd drained every dollar to pay debts she'd never heard of. And then he'd brought her to Hawaii on a trip funded by money stolen from her and from the man whose ticket he'd given to his mother. Adrienne stood slowly, her legs shaking from sitting too long on cheap carpet. She walked to the door. "Where are you going?" Garrett asked, not looking up. She didn't answer. Just opened the door and stepped into the tropical darkness. The motel security light flickered overhead, casting everything in harsh white, interrupted by seconds of darkness when the bulb failed. The air outside was humid and thick, carrying the smell of jet fuel from the nearby airport and salt from an ocean she couldn't see. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number she hadn't called in 3 weeks. I was sitting on my porch, watching the sun climb higher over the Atlantic, when my phone rang. 8 o'clock Eastern Time. The coffee had gone cold in my hand, but I didn't mind. Some mornings are for watching the light change, not for staying warm. The caller ID showed Adrienne's number. I answered on the second ring. "Dad," she said, and then her voice broke completely. She didn't ask for money. She didn't demand I fix what I'd done. She just cried, the kind of crying that comes from realizing you've lost something you can't name, something larger than money or vacations or the illusion of a working marriage. I let her cry. Counted the waves rolling in. Watched a fishing boat track north along the coast. Gave her the time she needed. "Do you know why I chose Hawaii?" I asked quietly, when the crying had settled into ragged breathing. Silence. "Your mother wrote me a note in 2019, I said. "Someday Hawaii. Promise me." She died 6 months later. I kept postponing. This year was the last time I could bring her there. This wasn't about my birthday, Adrienne. This was about keeping a promise to your mother. I heard my daughter crying on the line, not for her mother, not for me, but for herself, for the person she used to be, before she chose silence over her father 3 times in 7 years. Before she watched Garrett throw $50 at my feet and said nothing. Before she stood in an airport terminal and let a man steal the last thing I could give to the woman who'd loved us both. "Mom wanted," Adrienne whispered through tears. "Dad, I didn't know. I didn't." She broke down completely. 4,000 miles separated us. An ocean between the ocean I was watching and the ocean she was standing near, but couldn't afford to see. But in that moment, the distance felt larger than geography. It felt like the distance between who we used to be and who we'd become when we stopped measuring what mattered. "I know," I said quietly. "I know you didn't." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I know that too." I ended the call gently, not hanging up the way I'd hung up on Garrett, but pressing the button softly, the way you close a door when someone's sleeping and you don't want to wake them into a reality they're not ready to face. Adrienne stood under the flickering motel security light at 3 in the morning, phone still pressed to her ear long after the line had gone quiet. Inside the room, Garrett was scrolling through contacts, trying to borrow money from people who would never answer. Bernadette was complaining about thread count. The twins had finally fallen asleep holding each other. None of them knew yet. I had one more card to play, and it would come from the person Garrett trusted most, the accountant who had been reporting to me for 4 months. By morning Hawaii time, Graham Ashford would make a call that would strip away Garrett's final illusion of control. Graham's call came 3 hours after I'd ended the line with Adrienne, giving her just enough time to walk back into that motel room and sit in silence with what she'd learned. His face appeared on my laptop screen at 10 a.m. Eastern. He looked tired, the particular exhaustion of a man who'd been carrying someone else's secrets for 4 months and was finally setting them down. "Mr. Mercer," Graham said, "Garrett tried accessing the office safe remotely yesterday. Denied you changed the admin password. I want you to know I've been reporting to you for 4 months and I have everything documented." "You've done exactly what I asked," I said. "Walk me through what's new." Graham pulled up his screen. He used company funds to pay for Mrs. Bernadette's personal expenses, roughly $23,000. Spas, designer clothes, restaurants. I have the wire transfers, the invoices she submitted all fabricated. Dates don't match descriptions copy-pasted from templates. Textbook embezzlement. He paused. "And there's the email to RT. Raymond Teller," I said. "The real estate broker." "Yes, sir." Subject line timeline confirmation. Sent September 27th, the night before your trip. Graham forwarded the thread. My inbox pinged. I opened it. Garrett to Raymond Teller. 3 months prior. "RT need your discreet counsel on timing. How quickly can dissolutions move through NC Family Court once initiated?" Raymond's response, uncontested 45 to 60 days from filing. Why? Garrett's reply sent at 11:43 p.m. the night before he threw $50 at my feet. "Once the old man's assets are transferred, V gets 60 days, then we move forward with dissolution. She won't fight it. Never does. Can you recommend someone who handles these quietly?" V. Victoria, Adriana's middle name. An inside informant is like a loose thread planted in a counterfeit suit, invisible to the man wearing it, devastating the moment you pull. "Thank you, Graham," I said. "Conrad will be in touch. Keep your records organized." "Yes, sir. I'm sorry it came to this." "You did the right thing," I said, and ended the call. I forwarded the complete archive to Conrad, with one instruction in the subject line, "Send to Adrienne." 10 hours later, Hawaii time, Garrett's phone pinged. He was sitting on one of the narrow motel beds, Bernadette asleep on the other, the twins curled together in the corner. He didn't know Adrienne had spent the last hour crying to me about Constance. Didn't know the trip had been a sacred promise. Didn't know anything except that his cards were declined and nobody was answering. The email was from Douglas Merritt, Senior Loan Officer at Carolina Trust Bank. Subject credit line review notification. $380,000, business line of credit, now under review per cosigner fraud notification, filed September 28, 2023. Per acceleration clause section 4.2 full amount may be called due within 30 days pending review outcome. Please contact our office. Garrett dialed immediately. "Mr. Townsend," Merritt said, calm and precise. "Mr. Eugene Mercer is the co-signer on this loan. Without his signature, this would never have been approved. Your credit score in 2020 was 618. Silence. 5 years of consulting empire. 5 years of expensive suits and custom plates, and the confidence of a man who believed his charm had earned him real capital. All of it built on a tailor's signature. All of it existing because the man whose ticket he'd stolen, whose name he'd forged, whose $50 he'd thrown on marble floor, that man had signed a guarantee in 2020, knowing Garrett's credit was subprime, nearly failing. I signed that contract believing love for my daughter was enough collateral. 5 years later, I learned it wasn't. He knew, Garrett whispered after hanging up. He knew the whole time and signed anyway. The door opened. Adrienne walked back in, eyes red, face hollow. She looked at Garrett, looked at his phone, and knew something had broken that hadn't been broken an hour ago. What happened? She asked. Garrett held up the screen, credit line review, 618, score disclosure. She didn't know yet that her husband's credit score was lower than most college students. Didn't know he'd planned to leave her 60 days after stealing her father's assets. Didn't know that in her own email inbox forwarded by Conrad Whitfield, on my instruction was the complete archive, every calculation, every email to RT, every cold detail of when and how he planned to walk away. But she was about to find out. Adrienne opened her email an hour later and found Conrad's message with Graham's complete archive. She read the RT correspondence in silence, then walked to the bathroom and locked the door. Garrett heard her crying through the cheap walls but didn't knock. By the 12th phone call, Garrett's voice had traveled from confident to pleading to something that no longer had a name. And 12 Charlotte business partners had said no in 12 different ways without ever explaining why. He sat on a plastic chair at the public beach near the motel phone battery at 8%, scrolling through contacts with the desperate focus of a man who understands the next call might be the last before the device dies and the lifeline goes with it. Call 4 went to Rick Morrison, commercial real estate developer, someone Garrett had pitched 3 times in the past year. Rick had always been cordial, always kept the door open. Rick, it's Garrett Townsend. Listen, I need a short-term bridge loan, maybe $8,000 for airfare. Family emergency. I can have it back to you by... Click, dial tone. Call 7 went to Marcus Hendricks, an attorney Garrett had sent 2 clients to in 2022. Marcus owed him, or so Garrett believed. Marcus, it's Garrett. I'm in a temporary cash flow situation and can't help you, Garrett. The line went dead. Call 9 was Jim Caldwell, golf buddy, someone Garrett had bought drinks for a dozen times. Jim, please. Just hear me out. I know we haven't spoken in a while, but a long pause. Then Jim's voice quiet and final. I'm sorry, Garrett. I can't help you. The line clicked off. By call 12, Garrett sat staring at the ocean phone dying in his hand, whispering, "Why won't anyone answer? What did he tell them?" I hadn't told them anything. Reputation is like the thread count in fine wool, invisible from across the room. But every hand that touches the fabric knows instantly whether you used quality or cut corners for 35 years. Rick Morrison wore a charcoal suit I'd tailored in 2017 with hand-stitched lapels. Marcus Hendricks had come to my Charleston shop every spring for 15 years. Jim Caldwell's father was one of my first clients in 1988, and when Jim married in 2015, I made his wedding suit and his father's matching vest. Half of Charlotte's business community had stood in my workshop at some point, arms outstretched, making small talk about their families and their futures, while I measured shoulder width and inseam. I remembered their names. I remembered their children's names. I remembered the son-in-law some of them had met at my daughter's wedding 7 years ago, the young man who talked too much about deals he was closing and networks he was building. When Garrett said my father-in-law, Eugene Mercer, in those 12 calls, the men on the other end made their decisions in the silence that followed. Not because I'd asked them to refuse, not because I'd said a single word about what Garrett had done, but because 35 years of pristine reputation works silently And when you must choose between the craftsman who remembered your children's names and the son-in-law who threw money at that craftsman's feet in a public terminal, the choice isn't difficult. It's instant. At 5 p.m. Eastern, my phone buzzed. Ren had resent the TikTok video from Charlotte Douglas Airport the morning before with a message. "Grandpa, look, I found the Hawaii video." I opened it. Ren's 7-year-old face filled the frame, bright with excitement. "We're going to Hawaii," she announced, turning the camera to show Silas waving. "There's gonna be a big pool and the ocean and—" Then Garrett's voice in the background off camera, unhurried, certain. "Forget that old tailor. People like him spend their whole lives bowing down to serve others. He won't dare utter a word." I listened once, then again. Not because I needed to hear it twice to understand what he said, but because I wanted to hold the exact tone in my memory. The dismissal, the certainty of my silence, the assumption that a man who measures fabric for a living has no spine left to stand on. I wasn't angry. Anger makes you hesitate. I needed clarity. I pulled the checklist from my vest pocket and spread it on the porch railing. Written 6 weeks ago in blue ink, the night I discovered the forged signature. Every item ticked off over the past 24 hours. Check. Cancel resort reservation. Check. Remove authorized users from bank accounts. Check. File cosigner fraud notification. Check. Contact Gerald Whitmore. Check. Notify David Kahananui. Clause 7.3. Check. Confirm. Graham's evidence forwarded to Conrad. Check. Forgery report filed with police. One final line added this morning in black ink after Adrian's crying phone call about Constance. Listen to Ren's video. Decide. I picked up my pen. Watched the video one more time. Heard Garrett's voice dismiss 35 years of careful work as servitude. Heard his absolute certainty that I would never respond, never fight, never matter. I ticked the final box. No mercy left. I folded the checklist back into my vest pocket, every thread pulled, every seam unraveled, every measurement exact. The sun was setting over the Atlantic, turning the water the same gold it was already turning the Pacific, 4,000 miles west, where Garrett sat on a beach with a dead phone and no one left to call. I had listened. I had decided. Across the Pacific in Maui. Garrett was about to discover what happens when the rental car reserved under my name, paid with my card, gets repossessed in a resort parking lot with a police officer present. The rental car had been rented under my name, paid with my card, and I'd canceled the reservation at 11:30 a.m. Eastern the day before. By the time Garrett tried to retrieve it, the wheels were already in motion. Floyd had come over for dinner that evening. We'd sat at my kitchen table with takeout from the seafood place down the road, talking about nothing in particular. The weather turning cooler. The fishing boat he was thinking about buying, whether the Outer Banks would flood again this hurricane season. He didn't ask about Garrett. Didn't need to. Floyd had known me long enough to understand that some evenings you just sit with someone and let the silence do the talking. He was asleep in the guest room by 11, and I was getting ready for bed when my phone lit up with a notification at 11:45 p.m. Dakota had started a TikTok live stream. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened it. The screen filled with my 15-year-old granddaughter's face phone camera shaking slightly as she tried to hold it steady. Behind her, I could see the Wailea Resort parking lot, lit by security lights, palm trees swaying in the tropical breeze. "Okay, so my dad is like totally freaking out right now," Dakota said to the camera voice, carrying that performative casualness teenagers use when they're documenting drama they don't quite understand. "The rental car people are here, and there's literally a cop and—" "Dakota, stop filming!" Adrian's voice cut through sharp and exhausted. But Dakota didn't stop. She turned the camera, and I saw it all. Mara Holloway stood beside a white Toyota Camry clipboard, in hand, professional smile strained. Mara was 32, had worked for Enterprise in Maui for 6 years, and had dealt with enough difficult customers to recognize the exact species of entitlement walking toward her. Garrett approached with the aggressive posture of someone who'd spent the last 12 hours being told no and hadn't accepted it yet. "I need the keys," he said. "Now, Mr. Townsend." Mara said, voice calm and scripted. This vehicle was reserved under Eugene Mercer's account. The reservation was canceled yesterday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We received notification from the credit card company that— "I don't care what you received," Garrett interrupted. "My family is stranded. We need this car." Officer Kai Brennan, 41 Maui. PD for 15 years stepped forward with the practiced calm of someone who'd broken up 1,000 parking lot disputes. "Sir, if the reservation's been canceled, you'll need to—" "This is insane." Garrett's voice cracked. "Do you know how much we paid for this trip? Do you have any idea?" "The deposit was declined," Mara said, checking her tablet. "And Enterprise received notification of suspicious activity on the account. I can't release the vehicle." I paused the live stream. My hand was shaking, not with anger, but with something else. Something that felt like watching a promise I'd made to myself finally come true after 5 years of enabling, 5 years of co-signing, 5 years of believing that if I just measured the support right, the structure would hold. I steadied my breathing and pressed play. Garrett was yelling now, something about rights and lawyers and unacceptable service. Adrienne stood near the luggage pile, arms wrapped around herself, face hollow. The twins sat on suitcases 20 feet away, watching their father unravel under parking lot lights. Dakota's camera stayed steady, capturing everything. "Sir," Officer Brennan said, voice still calm, "you need to step back from the vehicle." "I'm not stepping anywhere." Garrett moved toward the car door. Officer Brennan blocked him. "Sir, I need you to calm down," and Garrett shoved him, not hard, not violently, but enough. Enough for Officer Brennan's hand to move to his belt. Enough for the 2 resort security guards to start moving closer. Enough for everything to become official and irreversible. Before I show you what happened when Officer Brennan reached for those handcuffs, have you ever watched consequences catch someone who thought they were untouchable? Comment: if this feels like justice, B. If it's gone too far. Add Y in 8 words. Note some details ahead are recreated for impact. Now that parking lot. Officer Brennan's voice cut through the noise. "Sir, you're under arrest for assault on a police officer and disorderly conduct." The handcuffs clicked closed. Dakota's camera captured it all. Garrett's face going from red to white. Adrienne turning away, resort guests gathering at a distance with phones out. Bernadette shrieking something about lawyers and lawsuits and how this never happens in Jamaica. The live stream lasted 11 minutes. 47 people watched it in real time. By morning, the clip would have 1,200 views. I watched the whole thing from my bedroom in Charlotte, 4,000 miles away, sitting on the edge of my bed in the dark. Watching revenge is like watching a suit come apart at the seams. Each pulled thread represents years of dismissal, years of contempt, years of being called that old tailor who wouldn't dare utter a word. I'd pulled every thread with surgical precision, and now the garment was unraveling in real time under Hawaiian security lights, while my granddaughter narrated it for the internet. The stream ended when Officer Brennan asked Dakota to put her phone away. The screen went black. I set my phone down and sat in the silence of my bedroom. Floyd was still asleep in the guest room. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of waves. 2 hours later, at 2 a.m. Eastern, my phone rang. "Maui County Police Department. Mr. Mercer." The officer's voice was professional, tired. "This is Sergeant Williams with Maui PD. Your son, Garrett Townsend, has been arrested for assault on a police officer and disorderly conduct. He listed you as an emergency contact. We're calling to see if you're able to post bail." I looked at the phone screen. 2 a.m. In Hawaii, it was 8 p.m., 2 hours after the arrest. "I appreciate the call, Sergeant," I said, "but I won't be posting bail. You can contact his mother, Bernadette. Let me give you her number." I recited the digits from memory. The phone number of a woman I'd divorced 30 years ago. A woman who'd raised Garrett to believe charm was currency and other people's money was there for the taking. "Understood, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Sergeant." I hung up, silenced my phone, set it face down on the nightstand. Floyd never heard the call. Never knew I'd spent 2 hours watching my son's arrest on a teenager's live stream. Never knew that when I finally lay back down and closed my eyes, I slept more soundly than I had in 5 years. I slept through the night for the first time in 5 years. When I woke at 8, my phone showed 47 missed calls from Hawaiian numbers and 6 voicemails from Bernadette, demanding to know why I'd given the police her number. I deleted them without listening and made coffee. At what point does a son-in-law stop being your responsibility? I'd been asking myself that question for 5 years, and the answer had finally arrived at 2 a.m. when I declined to post bail and went back to bed. Garrett was released from Maui County Jail at 8 a.m. Hawaii time. Bernadette had posted the bail using money wired from Thomas in Honolulu, the same Thomas who wore my charcoal suit, who'd probably heard the whole story by now, and decided enabling Bernadette's son was worth the investment. By 10 a.m. Hawaii time, Garrett was back at the motel, trying to salvage what remained. He pulled out his laptop and attempted to access his Charlotte office safe remotely, the digital safe where he kept backup drives, contracts, files he thought were secure. Access denied. He tried again. Same red error message. He called Graham. Graham Ashford answered on the third ring. I know because Graham called me at 4 p.m. Eastern to tell me what happened, his voice carrying that mixture of relief and guilt that comes from finally admitting something you've been hiding for months. "Why can't I access my own safe?" Garrett had demanded. Graham paused. 5 seconds of silence while he made the decision to stop pretending. "I've been reporting to your father for 4 months, Garrett." Another pause. The sound of Garrett's world rearranging itself. "What? 4 months. Since June. Eugene asked me to document everything, the expenses to Bernadette, the diverted funds, the forged signatures. I forwarded everything, including the email to RT about your plans." "Graham, what are you?" "The divorce plan, Garrett. The timeline. 60 days after asset transfer. I forwarded it all to Eugene's attorney last month." The line went dead. Graham told me Garrett just hung up. No threats, no pleading, just silence, then disconnection. I listened to Graham's update while sitting on my porch watching the September sun track west. I paused his account to steady myself, not from guilt or regret, but because hearing the fear in Garrett's voice as his world collapsed was more affecting than I'd expected. Not painful, just real. The difference between planning revenge with documents and timestamps and hearing the actual human sound of someone realizing they'd been measured, marked, and systematically dismantled by the man they'd called a servile old tailor. I thanked Graham and hung up. An hour later, Hawaii time, Adrian sat on the public beach near the motel with Dakota. The twins were building sandcastles in the late morning sun, while Garrett sat 20 feet away on a plastic chair staring at his phone. Adrienne had been silent since the arrest. Silent through the bail posting, silent through the Uber ride back, silent through the morning that followed. But Graham's confession about the RT email had broken something. "What is the RT email?" she asked Garrett. "Who is RT?" Garrett didn't answer, just kept staring at his phone. "Garrett," Adrian said, voice steady, but carrying an edge I'd never heard in 7 years. Graham said something about plans. "What plans?" Silence. Adrienne pulled out her phone and called Conrad Hayes, an IT consultant in Seattle she'd stayed in touch with from college. Someone who knew computers, knew how to access things. "Conrad," she said when he answered, "I need you to help me access an email archive. Someone forwarded it to a lawyer named Conrad Whitfield in Charlotte. Can you get into it?" I didn't hear this conversation directly. Conrad Hayes called Conrad Whitfield an hour later to verify the access request was legitimate, and Conrad Whitfield called me. We agreed she had a right to know. Conrad Hayes pulled up the archive and found the thread between Garrett and Raymond Teller, real estate broker, dated back 3 months. He read it to Adrienne over speakerphone while she sat on the beach, with tropical sun beating down and her daughter building sandcastles 15 feet away. Once old man's assets transferred, V gets 60 days, then we move forward with dissolution. Conrad read, voice clinical and clear. She won't fight it. Never does. Can you recommend someone who handles these quietly? 30 years of marriage dissolving in the time it takes to read one email, salt water evaporating under Hawaiian sun. Adrienne sat motionless, phone pressed to her ear. Conrad's voice continued reading. Garrett's response to Raymond's follow-up about timing. Need everything locked down first. Once the transfer clears, we move fast. 60 days maximum. She's never fought back about anything in 7 years. This won't be different. Adrienne, Conrad Hayes said. Are you still there? She didn't answer. Just sat with the phone against her ear, staring at the ocean that had promised paradise and delivered demolition. Mom! Dakota called from down the beach, voice bright with oblivious joy. Come see my sandcastle, I made a tower. Adrienne sat frozen. Conrad's voice was still in her ear, still reading, still cataloging the cold precision with which her husband had planned to abandon her, exactly 60 days after stealing her father's life savings, secure in the knowledge that she'd never fight, never resist, never do anything except accept whatever he decided. She'd never fought back about anything in 7 years. He'd been counting on that. Mom! Dakota called again, waving from beside her sandcastle. The tower's gonna fall, come look. Adrienne sat motionless on the sand, Conrad Hayes' voice still in her ear, reading the dissolution timeline, while 15 feet away, her daughter built a castle that would wash away with the tide. Everything Adrienne had believed about her marriage evaporated in the Maui heat. She ended the call without saying goodbye, stood slowly, walked past Garrett without looking at him, past Dakota's sandcastle, past the families playing in the surf. She walked to the edge of the water and stood there, waves washing over her feet, staring at the horizon where ocean met sky, and everything looked infinite and empty at the same time. There are people who abandon ships, and then there are mothers who abandon sons. I learned about Bernadette's final move from Graham Ashford at 2:15 that afternoon. He called me from across the street from the Shoreline Motor Lodge, voice low like he was narrating a crime scene. You're going to want to hear this, he said. I was on my back porch with Floyd Saxon watching November clouds mass over the valley. Floyd raised his eyebrows when I put the phone on speaker. Bernadette just showed up, Graham said. 2 o'clock exactly. She's got a Louis Vuitton suitcase, the cream one with brown trim. I remembered that suitcase. I bought it for our 20th anniversary back when I still believed marriage meant something permanent. Garrett came out to meet her in the parking lot. Graham continued. He looked like hell, still wearing yesterday's shirt. She didn't hug him, didn't even touch him, just said something about finding a solution. Floyd leaned forward, bourbon glass halfway to his lips. Then a silver Bentley pulled up, Graham said. Bentayga, maybe 220,000. Driver got out. My chest tightened before Graham said the name. Thomas Wicker, he said. 62, according to my research. Runs Wicker Properties high-end Honolulu real estate. Divorced twice, net worth around 40 million. The number didn't matter. What mattered was what Graham said next. He's wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit, Graham said. Chalk stripe, peak lapels. I'd know that cut anywhere, Eugene. That's your work. I set my bourbon down before I crushed the glass. Thomas Wicker was wearing one of my suits. Not just any suit, one of the custom pieces I'd made for Garrett's wardrobe 2 years ago before everything imploded. Garrett must have given it to him or sold it, or Bernadette took it from the luggage. Watching another man wear my craftsmanship while stealing my ex-wife felt like a specific kind of violation I didn't have words for. Bernadette kissed Garrett on the cheek, Graham said. Told him she'd call when she got settled. Then she got in the Bentley. They drove toward Kahala. Garrett just stood there in the parking lot for 10 minutes. Didn't move. Floyd Saxon let out a long breath. His own mother. His own mother, I repeated. I thought about Bernadette, the way she'd been 30 years ago, 28 years old, working reception at the fabric supplier on 7th Avenue, laughing at my jokes about Italian wool. She'd been sharp, then ambitious in a way that felt exciting rather than dangerous. When did ambition become desertion? When did a woman who'd raised a son decide that son was disposable the moment his credit card stopped working? Graham stayed on the line waiting. Keep watching, I told him. I want to know where she goes, who she calls, everything. Already on it, Graham said and hung up. Floyd poured himself another 2 fingers. You think Garrett knows she's not coming back? He knows, I said. He's just not ready to admit it. The afternoon passed in strange suspension. I worked on a waistcoat commission for a client in Richmond, my hands moving through familiar motions while my mind stayed 3,000 miles away. Conrad Hayes sent me an update. At 4, Adrienne had spent 2 hours in her hotel room. Wouldn't let Dakota in, wouldn't answer when the front desk called about dinner reservations. At 6 o'clock Hawaii time, midnight in Richmond, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Then something made me pick up. Dad, Adrienne's voice. I hadn't heard it in 3 years, not since the courtroom, when she'd sat on Garrett's side and refused to meet my eyes. It sounded older now, worn down like fabric rubbed too many times in the same spot. It's me, I said. Silence on the line. I could hear waves in the background, distant and rhythmic. I'm sorry, she said finally. About Constance. Graham told me today. I didn't know. We didn't know. I closed my eyes. Constance. My wife. The only person who had ever believed in what I was building. Gone at 61 from cancer 18 months before Garrett called asking me to co-sign his loan. I had never stopped grieving. I had simply learned to work through it. What kind of flowers did she like? Adrienne asked. Her voice cracked. I don't even remember. I should remember. Peonies, I said. White ones. She kept them on her kitchen table every spring. I should have called, Adrienne said. When it happened, I should have been there. Yes, the word came out flat without room for argument. I know you're angry, Adrienne said. I know what Garrett did was wrong. What we did was wrong. But we're family, Dad. We're still family. Can't we? You had 3 weeks, I said. Silence. You had 3 weeks to call me after Constance died, I said. 3 weeks to show up, send flowers, acknowledge that I'd lost the only family member who gave a damn. You didn't. Neither did Garrett. 2 weeks later, he called asking for money. We didn't know. Graham sent you both emails, I said. Told you about the funeral, June 14th. You didn't respond. Garrett was too busy planning his Hawaii investment. You were too busy supporting him. I could hear her crying, now soft sounds she tried to muffle. I'm sorry, she whispered. So am I said. Does that mean you forgive? No, I said. It means I'm sorry you're learning this late what it costs to choose the wrong side. You made your choice. You had 3 weeks to stand by me. You chose. I hung up before she could respond. Floyd Saxon watched me from across the porch. That was harsh. That was honest, I said. I went inside to my study and pulled open the bottom desk drawer. Underneath client files and fabric samples, I found what I was looking for, Constance's funeral program. Simple cardstock, cream-colored her picture on the front, 61 years old, smiling in her garden. June 14th, 2023. 22 days later, Garrett called asking me to co-sign his loan. I set the program on my desk where the lamplight caught it. Some mathematics you don't forget. The difference between civil and criminal is the difference between embarrassment and handcuffs. Conrad Whitfield called me at 10 o'clock on October 1st. I was at the Outer Banks cottage, Constance's funeral program still on my desk from the night before. The forgery report has been filed, he said. Charlotte police assigned a detective this afternoon. NC Statute 14-119 forgery of endorsement. It's official. Conrad Whitfield had been my attorney for 18 years, a methodical man of 56 who'd handled everything from business contracts to my divorce from Bernadette. He didn't waste words. When he said official, he meant the line had been crossed from civil dispute into criminal territory. How long until the warrant? I asked. Detective Ramsey moves fast, Conrad said. I'd expect notification by end of day. Garrett will have to surrender for arraignment or they'll pick him up. I looked out at the Atlantic. Gray October waves, relentless and cold. Thank you, Conrad. Eugene, he said, and paused. You understand what this means. This isn't just financial consequences anymore. This is potential jail time. I understand. Are you certain you want to proceed? I thought about Constance's kitchen, the way she'd looked when I found her on the floor. The ambulance had taken 20 minutes. She'd been gone for 18. I'd sat with her body holding her hand, and no one called. Not Garrett. Not Adrian. Not even after Graham sent them emails about the funeral. I'm certain, I said. Conrad hung up without another word. 4 hours later, Graham called from Maui. Garrett just got a notification on his phone from Charlotte Police Department. He read it 3 times, then sat down on the motel bed. Then he slid to the floor. What did it say? Arrest warrant being processed for violation. NC Statute 14-119 forgery of endorsement. Advising him to contact legal representation immediately. Graham's voice held something between fascination and horror. Eugene, he's on the floor, just sitting there against the bed staring at the wall. He hasn't moved in 5 minutes. Garrett sliding down the motel wall isn't collapse. It's the sound of consequences finally landing. Keep watching, I said. How long do you want me to stay? Until he gets on a plane. I spent October 1st finishing a commission for a client in Charleston. A double-breasted navy blazer with mother-of-pearl buttons. My hands moved through the work, automatically setting sleeves, basting linings, stitching buttonholes with the precision I'd spent 40 years perfecting. The fabric smelled like wool and sea air. Outside, autumn was settling over the coast like a weight. Floyd Saxon stopped by at 6 with takeout from the seafood place on Route 12. We ate on the porch, watching light fade over the water. Conrad called me, Floyd said. Told me about the warrant. I didn't answer. You going to be all right when this is done? I don't know, I said. It was the most honest thing I'd said in weeks. The next evening, October 2nd, my phone rang at 8. Adrienne's number. I almost didn't answer. Then I picked up. You're cold-blooded. She was screaming before I could say hello. You want to destroy my family? Your own son? Do you have any idea what you've done? He has a criminal warrant. They're going to arrest him. You're willing to send your son to jail because of money. I walked to my study and set the phone on my desk speaker on. Are you listening to me? Adrienne shouted. Dad, say something. I'm listening, I said. Then stop this call, Conrad. Drop the charges. Fix this before it's too late. We can work something out. We can pay you back. You can't, I said. We'll figure it out. Garrett made a mistake. He knows that now. But you don't have to destroy him. You don't have to destroy us. I opened my laptop and pulled up the audio file Graham had sent me 2 weeks ago. The recording from Garrett's office in Charlotte. The conversation with his accountant about the timeline for transferring my assets. Adrienne, I said, I want you to listen to something. I don't want to hear. Listen. I clicked play and turned up the volume. Garrett's voice came through the speaker, clear and confident. Once old man's assets transferred, W gets 60 days, then we move forward with dissolution. She won't fight it. Never does. By February, we're clear, properties liquidated, I'm free. Silence on the line. The recording continued. Garrett laughing about something. His accountant asking about the timeline. Garrett saying he'd learned from his mother how to exit a marriage without losing leverage. 30 years of tailoring taught me exactly where to make the cut, so the whole garment falls apart. I let it play for 45 seconds. Then I stopped it. Dad? Adrian's voice came out broken, barely a whisper. That's from August 15th, I said. 3 weeks after he asked me to co-sign his loan. 4 weeks after he came to Constance's funeral and told me he wanted to rebuild our relationship. He was planning to divorce you the entire time. 60 days after he stole my assets, you were disposable. That's not he wouldn't. Graham recorded 17 conversations, I said. You want to hear the one where he tells his lawyer you'll never check the bank accounts because you trust him? Or the one where he jokes about you being too busy with Dakota to notice the money moving? She was crying now, harsh sounds that reminded me of fabric tearing. I gave you 3 weeks, I said. 3 weeks to show up after Constance died, to acknowledge that I'd lost the only family that mattered. You chose Garrett. You chose wrong. Wait, he chose to steal from me, I said. He chose to forge my signature. He chose to plan leaving you the second he didn't need you anymore. I didn't destroy your family, Adrian. Garrett did, 2 years ago. You just didn't know it yet. I hung up. The cottage went silent, except for the sound of waves against the shore. I sat at my desk, looking at Constance's funeral program in the lamplight. June 14th, 2023. Her smile in the garden, holding white peonies. I walked to the kitchen and pulled down the bourbon I hadn't touched since the night she died. Poured 2 fingers into a crystal glass. The first drink in 4 months. It burned, going down familiar and devastating. Outside, October wind moved through the dunes. Inside, I stood at my kitchen counter and understood for the first time that revenge doesn't fill anything. It just empties you faster. The phone sat silent on my desk. 3,000 miles away, Adrienne was hearing her husband's voice on a recording, learning what I'd learned months ago: the people you trust most are the ones who know exactly where to cut. How long does it take to fall from paradise to nothing? 8 days, 26 hours, or just one phone call? I learned about Garrett's return from Graham Ashford on the evening of October 6th. He called from Charlotte Douglas Airport, watching arrivals from the rental car lot across from baggage claim. They just came through, Graham said. Maui via San Francisco and Denver. 26 hours, 2 layovers, economy seats. I was still at the Outer Banks cottage, the bourbon bottle from the night before sitting on my kitchen counter. Empty. The first time I'd finished a bottle in 4 months. Who paid for the tickets? I asked. Woman named Rebecca Voss, Graham said. Works in Garrett's old building. I checked her LinkedIn. Junior associate at the investment firm across the hall. She felt sorry for them. Charity tickets. From a colleague Garrett probably barely knew. The kind of humiliation that comes in small, specific packages. Garrett looks like hell, Graham continued. Lost maybe 15 pounds. Hasn't shaved in a week. Adrian's carrying everything because he's just walking. Not helping. Not talking. The daughter Dakota keeps asking questions. What kind of questions? Whether Grandpa Eugene is okay, Graham said. Whether they should call you. Adrienne told her not right now. I closed my eyes. Dakota was 15. Old enough to understand something had broken, too young to understand it had been broken long before Hawaii. Garrett stopped in the middle of the terminal, Graham said. Just stopped walking, stared at the arrivals exit. I think he realized. Realized what? Same terminal, Graham said. Same exit. 8 days ago, he walked through there and threw $50 at you. 2 20s and a 10. Now he's walking through broke tickets paid by a stranger family in pieces. The symmetry felt almost too perfect. The kind of thing you'd cut from fiction for being too obvious. But revenge doesn't care about subtlety. It just runs its course. 8 days to destroy what took 15 years to build. About the same time it takes for Hawaiian Sun to fade luggage tags. There's a son too, Graham said. Silas, 7 years old. Hasn't said a word since they landed. Just following his mother, Silas. I'd forgotten about Silas. Or maybe I'd chosen not to think about him. 11 years old, watching his father disintegrate. The collateral damage I'd filed under necessary losses. Keep following, I told Graham, I want to know where they go, what they do, everything. You sure? Graham asked. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard before. Not quite judgment, but close. I'm sure. Graham hung up. I spent October 6th at the cottage not working, not eating, just watching October light move across the water. Floyd called twice. I didn't answer. Conrad Whitfield sent an email confirming Garrett's arraignment was scheduled for October 9th at 9 in the morning, Mecklenburg County Courthouse. I read it and deleted it. The next morning, October 7th, Graham called again. Garrett went to his office, he said. Took an Uber. Still has the suitcase from Maui. It's got one of those bright tags, Paradise, in yellow letters. I could picture it. Garrett in wrinkled clothes carrying a suitcase that advertised everything he'd lost. The locks are changed, Graham said. Building manager met him in the hallway. Dale Morrison been managing the tower for 8 years. Professional but not unkind. What did Morrison tell him? 10-day eviction notice expired September 27th. Garrett's belongings are in basement storage. 30-day reclaim window, but there are outstanding fees. Security deposit went to unpaid rent. I thought about Garrett's office. 12th floor corner suite, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking uptown Charlotte. He'd sent me pictures when he first leased it, proud, in the way young men are proud of symbols. Oak desk, leather chairs. View of Bank of America Plaza. All of it in a basement now, boxed and tagged like evidence. Garrett asked about his Escalade, Graham said. The one he left in the airport lot. My chest tightened. Morrison told him it was towed September 28th, Graham said. 10-day hold at the impound lot, then auction. It sold October 3rd. Garrett's hand must have rested on that suitcase handle, the Paradise tag mocking him. This is what $50 contempt purchases. While he was in Maui, I said. Not a question, a statement. While he was in Maui, Graham confirmed. Watching sunset cocktails at the resort bar. His Escalade was going through auction in Charlotte. Sold for $38,000. Bank gets first claim on the proceeds. The Escalade had been Garrett's pride. Black on black, custom trim heated seats. He'd bought it the same week he closed his first major deal. Driven it to Constance's funeral. Parked it at the airport when he threw money at me and walked away. Gone now. Sold to a stranger while Garrett sat in a budget motel eating gas station sandwiches. Where is he now? I asked. Standing in the hallway, Graham said. 12th floor, outside his old office. The door still has his name on the glass. Garrett Mercer, Senior Investment Advisor. He's looking at his reflection in it. I could see it. Garrett in that empty hallway. His own name staring back at him from a door he couldn't open. Everything he'd built sealed behind changed locks and legal notices. His phone just buzzed, Graham said. I'm close enough to hear it. Calendar reminder. Arraignment October 9th, 9 a.m. Mecklenburg County Courthouse. 2 days. Garrett had 2 days before he'd stand in front of a judge and answer for forging my signature. 2 days to find a lawyer, prepare a defense figure, out how to explain why he'd stolen from his own father. Stay with him, I said. Eugene, Graham said. How much more do you need to see? I don't know yet. I hung up before he could ask what I was looking for. The truth was, I didn't know. I'd wanted Garrett to feel what I'd felt. The betrayal, the isolation, the moment when you realize the people you trusted have been planning your destruction. He felt it now. I knew he felt it. So why didn't it feel finished? Some calls ask for forgiveness. Others simply announce that the asking is over. Adrienne called on October 15th, a week after Garrett's arraignment had come and gone without me. I was at the cottage hemming a waistcoat for a client in Asheville when my phone lit up with her number. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. Dad, she said. Her voice sounded different, exhausted but steady. The desperate edge from our last conversation had been filed down to something harder. Adrienne, I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness, she said. I just wanted you to know I filed for divorce. October 10th. I moved to Stone Mountain, Georgia with Dakota and Silas. I'm taking care of things myself. I set down my needle and thread. Outside, October wind was stripping leaves from the oak trees. Are Dakota and Silas okay? I asked. Silence on the line. Then something that might have been a laugh, or might have been crying. Dakota asks about you every day, Adrian said. Wants to know if Grandpa Eugene is all right, if he's mad at her. Silas doesn't say much, but he drew you a picture last week. A man sewing at a table. My chest tightened. They're good kids, Adrian said. Better than they should be given everything they've seen. Better than their mother was. You were a good kid too, I said. The words came out before I could stop them. No, Adrian said. I wasn't. Not when it mattered. I chose wrong, and I'm not asking you to pretend I didn't. I just wanted you to know they're okay. We're okay. Or we will be. I looked at Constance's funeral program on my desk. June 14th, 2023. 4 months and 1 day ago, a lifetime. I've set up an education trust for Dakota and Silas, I said. Conrad will contact you with the details. Full tuition, books, living expenses. College or trade school, their choice. Dad, that is all I can do right now, I said. The line went quiet. I could hear traffic in the background, the sound of Georgia highways. Thank you, Adrian said finally. I hung up before either of us could say anything else. You tell yourself revenge is about justice, but it's really about who you become when the dust settles. Over the next 2 weeks, Conrad sent me updates. Short emails, professional and precise. The kind of reporting you do when the outcome is already decided, and you're just documenting the aftermath. October 17th, bank called the full loan due, $380,000 plus accrued interest. October 19th, Garrett filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy. No significant assets to distribute. The trustee filed a no-asset report within the week. The discharge process would take months, but for all practical purposes, his financial life ended the day the petition was filed. October 23rd, DA's office reviewing forgery case for prosecution. Grand jury convenes November 6th, October 28th. Garrett interviewed for sales position at furniture warehouse in Kannapolis. Lives in studio apartment 400 square feet, shares building with recently divorced men and community college students. October 30th. Bernadette Mercer confirmed living with Thomas Wicker in Kahala, Honolulu. Zero contact with Garrett since October 2nd departure. Changed phone number. I read each email once, filed it in a folder labeled Family Legal, and went back to work. But the work felt different now. The precision I'd spent 40 years perfecting felt like going through motions. Setting sleeves, basting linings, hand-stitching buttonholes with silk thread. The same patterns I'd followed since I was 23 years old, learning the trade in a shop on Lexington Avenue. Floyd stopped by most evenings. We'd sit on the porch with bourbon watching October turn to November. He didn't ask about Garrett anymore. Didn't ask what I was feeling or whether I was all right. We just sat there, 2 men in their 60s, watching the Atlantic turn gray with winter. On October 31st, Conrad sent a final summary. 3 pages single-spaced, documenting the complete dissolution of everything Garrett had built. Assets seized. Credit destroyed. Marriage ended. Criminal charges pending. Mother vanished. Future reduced to studio apartments and furniture sales. Conrad's report reads like an autopsy, each line a catalog of what used to be alive. I read it once, folded it precisely along the center crease, set it in my desk drawer next to Constance's funeral program. Then I opened my laptop. The airline website loaded slowly, the kind of deliberate pace that gives you time to reconsider. I didn't reconsider. I searched for flights from Charlotte to Maui. November 12th. 1 passenger. Non-stop if available. There was a non-stop. CLT to OGG. Departure, 10:47. Arrival, 4:15 p.m. SEM, local time. 6 hours over the country, then 5 hours over the Pacific. Window seat available. I thought about Constance standing in my kitchen 3 years ago holding a travel magazine with a picture of Haleakala at sunrise. "We should go," she'd said, "before we're too old to climb volcanoes." "After I retire," I'd told her. "We'll go after I retire." She'd died 4 months before my planned retirement date. I clicked the seat selection. 17A window. 1 ticket, 1 room, 1 last measure. The booking page asked for passenger information. I typed my name carefully. Eugene Theodore Mercer. Date of birth: March 15th, 1960. 63 years old. Traveling alone. The confirmation email arrived at 11:47 p.m. 1 ticket window seat non-stop, CLT to OGG November 12th. Total cost $873. Return open. I printed the confirmation on the small office printer Constance had bought me for my birthday 2 years ago. The paper came out warm, smelling like toner and possibility. I walked to my desk and pulled out Constance's funeral program. Opened it carefully. Inside was the photo I'd chosen for the service, Constance standing on Wrightsville Beach, summer 2022, looking west, toward an ocean she never got to see. She was smiling, wind in her hair. 60 years old and still believing we had time. I folded the confirmation email and placed it inside the program next to her picture. 1 ticket to paradise. No cosigner required. Outside, November wind moved through the dunes. Inside, I stood at my desk, understanding that revenge had cost me everything. It was supposed to cost Garrett. The difference was I'd chosen it. He'd just received it. The laptop screen dimmed to sleep mode. In 12 days, I'd board a plane to the island, where my son had fallen, and my sister had never arrived, and I still didn't know what I was looking for. The final measurement a tailor takes is the one between justice and grace. Floyd came to the cottage on November 20th, the night before I left for Hawaii. He brought bourbon and sat on the porch without asking if I wanted company. We watched November waves roll in dark and rhythmic. "Do you regret it?" he asked after his second glass. I didn't answer immediately. The question deserved precision. "Do you want the honest answer or the comfortable one?" "The honest one," Floyd said. I went inside and returned with a piece of paper from my desk. Lined notebook sheet, the kind I'd used for 40 years to track client measurements. But this wasn't measurements. It was a checklist, handwritten in blue ink. Floyd held it under the porch light. Every item had a tick mark beside it. Bank account frozen. Credit destroyed. Business collapsed. Assets seized. Marriage exposed. Mother departed. Reputation ruined. Criminal charges filed. The final line read, "Leave education fund for Dakota and Silas. As for Adrienne, let her be the tailor of her own life." Floyd looked at me over the paper. "Complete cut then," he said. "The only kind that matters," I said. "I cannot tailor a suit for someone who refuses to stand still for measurement. Garrett made his choices. I made mine. And now I keep a promise I should have kept when Constance was alive to see it." Floyd handed the checklist back. We sat in silence until his glass was empty. Then he stood, put his hand on my shoulder for 3 seconds, and left without another word. Brothers don't always need more than that. I flew to Maui on November 21st. The plane left Charlotte at 10:47 a.m., crossed the country in daylight, then spent 5 hours over the Pacific. I sat in 17, a window seat, watching America disappear behind clouds. The hotel was modest. Not the Wailea Grand where Garrett's family had been humiliated. Just a small place near the beach, clean and quiet, the kind of accommodation Constance would have chosen. I spent 3 days walking beaches, eating alone, watching tourists take pictures of sunsets. I didn't feel like a tourist. I felt like a man delivering something 4 months too late. On Thanksgiving evening, November 23rd, I walked to Wailea Beach at sunset. The sky turned the kind of gold you can't capture in photographs. the kind Constance had shown me in travel magazines. I'd bought a white flower lei that morning from a vendor near the hotel. Plumeria. Traditional. Simple. The flowers smelled sweet and slightly funereal. I reached into my vest pocket and pulled out the note I'd carried since October. Constance had written it in 2019, 4 years before she died. I'd found it in her kitchen drawer when I was clearing her house after the funeral. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. Precise. Careful. Someday, Hawaii. Promise me. I stood at the water's edge. The surf was gentle, rolling in with the kind of rhythm that makes you forget time exists. I'm here, Constance, I whispered. No one was close enough to hear. Just an old man talking to the ocean. We made it to Hawaii. The lei felt light in my hands. White flowers against golden sunset. A lei on water is temporary beauty. 30 seconds of sunset color before the ocean reclaims it, like revenge. I set the lei on the surface and watched it drift. The current caught it immediately, pulling it toward the horizon. Golden light made the white flowers glow for a moment. Then the sun dropped lower, and the colors shifted to purple, then gray. The lei vanished into the distance. I stood there until full dark, then turned and walked back to the hotel alone. The trip lasted 10 days. I flew home December 1st, returned to the cottage, went back to work. Clients needed suits, holiday commissions, a father of the bride tuxedo for a wedding in Durham, a waistcoat for a New Year's party in Raleigh. Life continued in the specific, measured way it always had. On December 15th, a courier knocked on my door at 10 in the morning. "Package from Georgia," he said. "Needs signature." I signed. The box was small, wrapped in brown paper, my address written in careful adult handwriting I didn't recognize. No return address except Stone Mountain, Georgia. I opened it at my kitchen table. Inside was a lei, much smaller than the one I'd bought in Maui. Clumsy, but beautiful. White flowers, dried and fragile, strung on what looked like fishing line. Some of the petals were broken. The whole thing smelled faintly of salt and thyme. Underneath was a card, hand-drawn, crayon and marker. A stick-figure man standing on a beach next to a woman in a white dress. The sun was bright yellow. The ocean was blue with white wave lines. I opened the card. The handwriting inside was a child's. Big letters. Careful spacing. "Grandpa, I went to Hawaii too in September. I picked these for you. Grandma Constance liked white flowers, right? Mom told me. I love you. Dakota." I read it twice. The first time to understand the words. The second time to understand what they meant. Dakota had been in Hawaii in September. During the humiliation. During the motel. During the arrest. While I was destroying her family, she'd been picking flowers because someone told her Constance liked white ones. The moment before tears is recognition. A 15-year-old remembered when a 63-year-old forgot. I cried. Not the controlled grief I'd felt at Constance's funeral. Not the cold anger I'd felt reading Garrett's forged signature. Not the hollow emptiness I'd felt watching revenge complete itself item by item. This was different. Grace. I sat at my kitchen table in the Outer Banks cottage and wept like a man who'd spent 6 months holding his breath underwater and finally broke the surface. Dakota loved me anyway, despite everything I'd done, despite what it cost her family, despite the fact that her father was bankrupt and her mother was divorced and her whole world had collapsed. She'd picked white flowers in Hawaii and saved them for 3 months to send to the grandfather who'd destroyed her life. I cried until I couldn't cry anymore. Then I stood, walked to my desk, and set Dakota's card beside Constance's funeral program and the completed revenge checklist. 3 documents, 3 measurements, the wife I lost, the son I destroyed, the granddaughter who loved me anyway. I picked up my blue pen and wrote one final line at the bottom of the checklist. Forgive myself pending. And to you listening to my story, remember this: revenge is the most precise measurement a man can take, but it's also the emptiest. I spent 8 weeks destroying my son's life with precision. Every item on my checklist got its tick mark. Every consequence landed as planned. But when it was done, I wasn't whole again, just emptier. Don't make my mistake. Don't think proving you were right will fill the hole that betrayal leaves behind. The hardest lesson I learned is this: you can execute perfect revenge and still lose everything that matters. My son betrayed me. He forged my signature, stole my money, humiliated me. But what I did in response, freezing his accounts, exposing his crimes, watching his marriage collapse, it didn't restore what Constance and I had. It didn't bring her back. I believe God allowed me to feel that emptiness so I could understand what grace looks like through a 15-year-old's white flowers from Hawaii. Sometimes lessons come wrapped in the innocence we almost destroyed. If you've stayed with me through this story, I want to hear from you. Have you faced family betrayal like this? What would you have done? Leave a comment. These family stories about revenge matter because they remind us we're not alone. If this meant something to you, please share it and subscribe to Dad. Family Revenge for more family stories about revenge, grace, and redemption. Thank you for staying until the very end. I know these stories aren't easy to hear, but they're important. One final note. While the core truth of this story is real, some details have been adjusted for privacy and storytelling. What matters is the lesson, and I hope you carry it with you. God bless.